Today's talk is titled All Roads Lead to Rome, to be delivered by Andy Feigin. Andy has been a member of this congregation since 2010. He loves sharing his spiritual journey with everyone who comes through these doors in person and online. Andy and his wife, Mimi, are devout travelers discovering and learning about life wherever they go. Andy?
Mille vie ducant homines per secula Romam, which translates to 1,000 roads lead men forever to Rome, which has evolved into the common phrase, all roads lead to Rome. The ground upon which the ancient city of Rome first took shape consisted of 7 hills, the famous 7 hills of Rome. These hills rise gently above a bend in the Tiber River, and together they formed the earliest neighborhoods, markets, temples, and gathering places of Rome. As Ted mentioned, I travel a lot. I'm kind of addicted to the sense of excitement and freedom I get when I enter an airport or set out on a road or train trip, knowing that I'm on the verge of an adventure. My wife, Mimi, and I enjoy collaborating on many challenges involved in travel, usually with good results. And whether the travel has been for business or pleasure, or a combination of both, we call that a bizcation, it's always an adventure. As I've grown older and focused more on my spiritual journey, I've increasingly come to appreciate what is gained from travel, exploring life by immersing oneself in new environments and new cultures. The first hymn we sang today touches on that feeling. It sounds along the ages, soul answering to soul, forever on resounding and knowing not of time, the music of its eternal chime. Today's talk is a mashup of history, mythology, fables, and spiritual quest. And in honor of the 7 hills of Rome, I will share 7 spiritual experiences I had while in the Eternal City. When we hear mythology, we think of the ancient Greeks and Romans and perhaps the Vikings. To walk where myths were imagined and believed is a profound experience. From a Wikipedia entry regarding the goddess Venus. Venus was the Roman goddess whose functions encompassed love, beauty, desire, sex, fertility, prosperity, and victory. She was the ancestor of the Roman people through her son Aeneas, who survived the fall of Troy and fled to Italy. Julius Caesar claimed her as his ancestor. Venus was central to many religious festivals and was revered in Roman religion. I hoped to commune with Venus by visiting the temple erected to her, the Temple of Venus. I took this photo from the top of the Colosseum, looking westward towards the Forum. Prior to exploring the Colosseum, while walking through the Forum, I had hoped to visit the temple close up, but they had closed access to it. So I had to settle for this view from a distance. Perhaps because we were forbidden from getting there, it took on even greater mystical power. It is thought to have been the largest temple in ancient Rome. The columns on the left and right formed its outer perimeter, with the curved arch altar at the west end. Close up, or closer up, imagine for a moment what it might have looked like with Venus on her altar. Back in 135 of the Common Era, when Emperor Hadrian inaugurated it. An earthquake in the early 9th century destroyed much of the temple, and Pope Leo IV ordered a church, Santa Maria Nova, to be built adjacent to the ruins, which you can see here, including a bell tower. Like many of the ancient structures that were damaged over time, much of the stone of the Temple of Venus ended up being repurposed in buildings erected in the Middle Ages. That's one of the ways Rome remains eternal, with its parts and pieces repurposed over the millennia. In fact, the stone benches in front of our hotel in Rome are said to have once been part of the Colosseum. Second hill. I'm not a historian, that's probably already apparent, but history fascinates me. I'm not a religious scholar, but religion fascinates me. Empires form pathways along which ideas and culture can travel with the least friction. A topic for another day would be to compare the roads of the Roman Empire, along which many ideas and influences traveled 2,000 years ago at the speed of horse and foot, versus the high-speed highways of the World Wide Web, by which modern ideas and influences travel literally at the speed of light. If you are simply a wanderer philosopher such as Jesus was, and you walk through a region sharing your vision, your chances of changing the world are pretty slim. You may cause ripples in towns where you've spoken, but they will almost likely fade away like the ripples on a pond. However, if your message gets onto the pathways of an empire, as did the teachings of Jesus via his disciples, then it has the potential to spread far and wide, as indeed it has. The job which got us to Rome in the first place, I mentioned the bizcation earlier, was wrapped up on a Thursday, and so Friday, September 12th, was to be the day for visiting the Roman Forum. I studied a little bit the evening of the 11th, watching a YouTube video and reading an article in Wikipedia about the Forum. Mimi and I always try to include a visit to historical Jewish locations in our travels. And a funny thing happened that on the way to the Forum, thank you, I was wondering if you'd get it. We walked through the Jewish ghetto and the great synagogue of Rome, which stands situated along the Tiber River. So we made that our first stop. I'm so glad you got that joke. We passed through tight TSA level security, first into a museum adjacent to the synagogue. In the museum, we learned about the history of Jews in Rome, dating back to at least 161 BCE, before the Common Era. The museum is full of items which were donated by Jewish families who somehow managed to maintain them through the Holocaust. And there was a lengthy section on the history of a legendary giant golden menorah that was brought to Rome following Emperor Titus's victory over a Jewish rebellion in the Roman province of Judea. Titus's army destroyed the Second Temple in Jerusalem, depicted here in an artist's rendering, collected treasures including the golden menorah, which was carried back to Rome and displayed in the Temple of Peace, along with other treasures from the conquest. Now long lost, the fate of the menorah remains uncertain, with theories ranging from its destruction, being melted down, or hidden somewhere beneath Rome. We visited the synagogue itself, which was inaugurated in 1904, not that long ago, during a period when Jews were an established community integrated into society of Rome. It happens to be the only house of worship in Rome with a square dome. From the synagogue, we made our way towards an entrance to the Forum. And the first thing we see is the Titus Arch. The Titus Arch itself depicting the return of Emperor Titus's army carrying the golden menorah. There's an up-close section of the fresco that displays that. And here's a better picture from apparently the past when that was cleaner and a little bit in better shape. And you can see quite a few details. Being of Jewish heritage, this all meant a lot to me. Many generations ago, and to Mimi, many generations ago, some of my ancestors may have traveled the road from Judea to Rome and been depicted in this arch, who knows, and possibly lived in that ghetto which we had just visited. The third hill, the Capitoline Museum, situated on the Piazza del Campidoglio, atop the Capitolio Hill. It has a remarkable collection. After entering, we needed a restroom and were directed downstairs to this corridor named the Gallery, built in the 1930s to link two buildings that comprise the museum. It's about 8 meters below the level of the piazza, and during excavations for its construction, workers came across the remains of an ancient road that went from the Capitoline Hill to the Campus Martius, where many temples, theaters, monuments once stood. Housed in the gallery is an exhibition of 130 marble inscriptions from ancient Roman times, arranged thematically to illustrate different aspects of public and private life in ancient Rome. The Romans left us a treasure trove of information, literally carved in stone, that help us get an up-close idea of how they lived and thought and believed. I was particularly fascinated by the numerous languages that appeared on the inscriptions. It was explained to us how in the regions they conquered, the Romans would spread their language, Latin, which then merged with the indigenous languages of the conquered peoples, eventually creating new languages we now call the Romance languages of Europe. We could have spent an entire day in this one corridor, but there was so much more to see. The origin of Rome is a combination of history and mythology. Not surprising, it's a long story, full of ancient gods and goddesses. Romulus and his twin brother Remus were the offspring of a goddess who was raped by Mars and related to Aphrodite. Abandoned on the Tiber River, they were suckled by a she-wolf and raised by a shepherd and his wife. Romulus, or one of his supporters, murdered his brother Remus and went on to establish the first kernel of the city which bases its name on his, Rome. One other item I'll share, this beautiful Dosia porcelain, a replica of Michelangelo's The Deposition or Brandini Pietà, which I think is in the original is in Florence, depicting Christ with his mother Mary, Mary Magdalene, and a man, either his father Joseph or Nicodemus, not sure. Just so much passion is depicted in this piece, I couldn't help but be moved. Much of what remains of ancient Rome, like the Titus Arch, was built in honor of their great leaders. This is a photo of what remains of the Basilica of Maxentius, also known as the Basilica of Constantine, situated in the Forum. Back then, basilica meant just a large public building with multiple functions. It was only later that it came to mean a cathedral. Constantine had this one built and commissioned a colossal statue of himself, which perhaps stood on the plinth in the foreground. Parts of that colossus are on display in the courtyard of the museum. You can get an idea of the scale of things from Mimi's hand. A full-scale replica is in the adjacent garden to the museum. Colossal indeed. A little side story of shared humanity. After the museum, while walking back to our hotel, we took a break at an outdoor cafe, and we ordered coffee and one bowl of gelato. The waitress came back with our beverages and the serving of gelato, and she asked, in perfect English, mind you, "Who gets the gelato?" Pointing to the space between us, we answered, "We're going to share." And she said, "Ah, like real life." Just loved that. The fourth hill, the Pantheon, is a perfect example of the arc of history that is Rome. The original temple built by Agrippa in 27 before the Common Era is dedicated to Venus, Mars, and Julius Caesar, who was considered a demigod. But it burned down, and in 126 CE, the Common Era, Emperor Hadrian and the current round building was constructed on the same site containing statues of those gods. But with the Catholic Church's rise and the Roman Empire's fall, the building came under Pope Boniface, I don't know if I'm saying that right, Boniface, I don't know, the Fourth's control, what is it? Boniface. Pope Boniface IV's control, and was turned into the Basilica of St. Mary and the Martyrs. It was cleaned up from years of neglect, and statues of Christian saints replaced Roman gods. It's one of the city's oldest complete structures, still standing in remarkably good condition, including its famous dome, not necessarily with that guy, with an open hole at its top. It felt remarkable to be standing in this breathtaking structure that has survived 19 centuries and continues to hold Catholic Mass every Saturday at 5 p.m. and Sunday at 10:30 a.m. Ancient Rome, the Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, today's Roman Catholic Church. Within a day's walk, you can traverse 3,000 years of history and see with your own eyes so much of what informs our society to this day. The fifth hill. We took trains south past Naples to Sorrento in the Vesuvian region, that is, the region dominated by Mount Vesuvius. Within a day's, famous for its cataclysmic eruption in 79 CE, which buried Pompeii in volcanic ash. Still an active volcano, it was once much taller and a lot more deadly. Visiting the archaeological site of Pompeii has been a lifelong goal of mine, and it did not disappoint. With the help of our guide, Lalo, and a good workout of our imaginations, the life of a once bustling San Luis Obispo-sized city came into focus. You will get to walk along the main streets, like this one, that once had storefronts and entrances to homes and places of worship. Visit theaters, and here's a bakery. You can clearly see the oven where the bread was cooked. There are even fast food restaurants. That's Lalo, our guide, explaining to us that each of those vessels held either hot or cold food, which would be ladled out to customers. There are brothels featuring a large penis over the door. Some Pompeians lived in elegant mansions, while servants most often lived in sad cubicles like this one. In what remains of their temples, I felt a spiritual energy connecting me to what was once holy from Pompeians. However they followed their spiritual paths, I identified with what we all are searching for: peace, harmony, community, and love. But you can't visit Pompeii without also being reminded of its catastrophic demise. Throughout the site, we see plaster casts made from the cavities left by dead bodies preserved under the ash of the volcano. Pompeii is a roller coaster of emotions as you immerse yourself in this remarkable frozen moment in time. Just south of Pompeii on the Amalfi Coast, there are 3 islands known as the Cyrenaica, where the mythological sirens lived and made a habit of tempting sailors who would end up crashing on the island's shores. Ulysses famously had himself tied to the mast of his ship in order to resist their temptation, as told in Homer's Odyssey. The 6th hill, Herculaneum. We also visited Herculaneum, where the ancient ways of life are even better preserved. The morning of the day we were to go there, while having our breakfast in our hotel, Annalise, the delightful waitress we had come to know, asked what we were up to that day, and we told her we're going to Herculaneum. She said, "Oh, that is very beautiful. You will see so much more than at Pompeii, but it is very sad so many people perished." And she teared up, thinking of her ancestors suffering their awful fate. It was a very real visceral pain for her. Kind of reminded me of how I feel when we talk about 9/11. Compared to Pompeii, but less well-known, Herculaneum, modern-day Ercolano, was buried in mud rather than ash. You see, mud is less corrosive than ash, so more of the structures of Herculaneum were actually preserved, although less has been uncovered in the archaeological digs to date. Here's a middle-class home with stairs going up to the 2nd floor where there were bedrooms located. Here's a private altar that was in another home. Remarkable tile work in the public baths. But you learn that possibly a lot of those tiny little tiles were broken from much larger ones that used to be on the sides of buildings. Again, repurposed. And another interior with a presumably restored roof. Before Vesuvius erupted, Herculaneum was at the edge of the Tyrrhenian Sea, and that arrow points to what was once the southwest edge of the town, right at the water, where there were boathouses. My photo here was taken standing on the current level of the city, looking down at what were the boathouses, essentially at sea level. As the volcano's devastation worsened, people fled towards the water, hoping to escape. But the poisonous gases that were filling the atmosphere killed them before they could make it, and their remains piled up and were then covered in that volcanic mud. Each of those arched chambers below are filled with skeletons of people captured in a moment of ultimate horror. An archaeological treasure trove, but a tragic scene. Here's one photo of what remains of those terrified souls. Finally, my 7th hill. One evening after dinner on the Piazza del Popolo, the People's Plaza, we hailed a cab back to our hotel and met Alfonso, our driver, who spoke excellent English. He'd been to the States. He asked where we were from, and we gave the answer that had been getting the best results. We're from California and New York. Everyone in Italy knows someone from New York, but they all love, oh, California. He said, oh, New York, do you know where Yonkers is? Having lived in the tri-state area for decades, we laughed and said, yes, we know where Yonkers is. Well, Alfonso said, my uncle Reno has a fantastic restaurant in Yonkers. You must go. They serve authentic Italian food, the best. It's called Reno's Trattoria. I get out my phone while we're riding back to the hotel and search for Reno's Trattoria in Yonkers, and sure enough, there it is on Lockwood Boulevard. Okay, we will try to go there next time we're in New York. Just so happens we visited New York a couple of weeks later and made plans to meet our friend Peter Musty, who has spoken here at the UUCC, A.J. Musty's grandson, at Reno's Trattoria, meet at Reno's Trattoria. Peter lives upstate, and coming to Yonkers is probably an hour less driving than getting all the way to Manhattan. When we arrive at the restaurant, we're told Reno is not yet there, but he will be soon. We sit and start our dinner, and then sure enough, Reno comes over and says hello. We tell him the story, and he says, my nephew Alfonso sends me more customers than anyone else, all the way from Rome. We had a wonderful dinner, and so I can truly say all roads lead to Rome. Thank you.